Hello, everybody, and welcome into another exciting edition of The Rundown. We're talking baseball and softball, getting into the swing of things. Myself, Jack Heckman, bringing you the good stuff. And right now, Jack, it's been a little tough to get games in. Mother Nature has just a little bit of winter left in the bag, but it looks like hopefully very soon, going into next week, we're going to be into the thick of spring season. We're going to have baseball and softball on the diamonds here at the high school level.
Yeah, a couple exciting matchups coming up, but Mother Nature, who knows what's going to happen next week?
Who knows indeed. But before we get into some games to highlight, we'll get into baseball and softball for CSAA teams. If you want to be a part of the rundown, be sure to let us know 796-7000 for more information, as well as big thanks to our sponsor, Dazos Digital. Target your target audience with the experts of Dazos Digital. Find out more at dazosdigital.com. Graphic design, website design, video streaming, audio streaming, the whole nine yards. You can find all the services and more at dazosdigital.com. Let's get into some games here, Jack, that we have already had in the books. We'll start on the baseball side, and then we'll go to softball. So far, we've had three singular games played based on the records that not only Jack, myself, all of that has been placed on the interweb, this new thing that's taken the world by storm. We've found only three games that have been played so far. Right now, Kent City with a win against Wyoming Lee, a dominant win with that 17-0. And then we also have Lakeview getting a sweep over Vesterberg to start the season. There are some games that are going on right now, but we'll really highlight those going into next week's episode as we have a lot of games scheduled for not only today as we're recording this Wednesday, probably today as you're hearing this Thursday or Friday into the weekend of next week. So we'll get you all up to date on those. But so far, I think the one notable thing, Jack, Lakeview starting off the year 2-0. That's a great start for that program.
Had a rough season last year, but I mean, you got a big win in the first one against Vesterberg, and then you win two. That was back on April 4th. They don't play again until Thursday, which would be the 10th. So a little bit of a break in between those games, but you got Carson City. We already saw Central Montcalm play a couple games there. And then you have three games next week, the two against White Cloud on Monday, and then one on Wednesday. Who knows? Lakeview could be sitting in a prime position. Who knows? 6-0 could be on the brinks for them.
Absolutely. And nothing is more momentumous than winning your first couple games of the season in terms of the long-term outlook. Looking over at softball now, we'll swing over to that side. Central Montcalm 1-1. They got a split against Greenville over at their place on the road. Obviously, tough place to play. Lakeview as well, losing to Vesterberg in a pair in that doubleheader. Kent City playing one singular 7 against Wyoming Lee, and they get a dominant win, 15-0. So a dominant win to start on both sides for the Eagles. And Newaygo Falls in a tight game against Wyoming at their place, 6-5. The final scores there. So notably, Lakeview on the other side, 0-2, but I think that's a really big game to start the year for Newaygo. Obviously, not getting the result they wanted, a 6-5 loss, but getting that game in and playing competitive, even if it might be a loss, might be just enough to get the juices flowing going in because they got some tough games ahead.
Monday it'll be Reed City, but going back, they didn't have a single earned run. It was 5 defensive errors that led to 6 runs, and that's just something that can't happen in a game. You played 9 innings in, where Stamp pitched 9, allowed 6 hits, allowed the 6 runs, 0 earned runs, and 11 strikeouts. Offensively, they did have 5 runs on 9 hits. You got Reed City coming up, though. That's going to be a tough matchup.
Absolutely. And with that, now that we got the scores in the books already, let's get to some big games coming up. And we'll start in the CSAA-Red for baseball. Big Rapids will be taking on Traverse City Central. That's going to be a very interesting start to the season. Not the toughest opponent out of the gate for Coach Scarpelli. Newaygo and Reed City, I mean, that's going to be a really good one on Monday. Then you obviously have Grant. They're going to be playing Ludington. That's a really good program, right? Obviously, across all sports. Baseball, they have been much better over the last couple of years. And Chip Hills, they're going to play at Harrison. Harrison's a team that had a little bit of a rough stretch, Jack, that you noticed, especially later into last year. And so it'll be interesting to see where they get off on the right foot. And Tri-County as well. They're going to be starting with Grant to start the week, a very competitive program from last year's record to speak for herself.
Yeah, Tri-County, only 8 wins last year. They need to get some wins. Grant, that's going to be 3 extremely tough games. I'm curious on who will be pitching. Today they're playing Greenville. I don't know who got the start there. But last week we talked about the 4+ team ERA. That's something that if they want to go ahead and win the 10 to 15 games mark, they got to pitch a lot better than they did last year. And that's something that's going to be tough. You lost a couple pitchers. Looking to see what happens next week.
Absolutely. And especially with a lot of these conference games going to be some of the first games for these teams, it's really get going or you're going to be left behind, especially for how tight the CSAA race is now that it is split into the two divisions, which you talked about last week. If you did miss out on last week's episode, be sure to find it wherever you found this episode on YouTube at Big Rapids Daily News. Moving over to the white. Kent City, obviously, with a good start to the year, and especially behind Aaron Vanderwest. He's been an elite athlete across all sports, but he's getting it done on the diamond for this crew. But they're going to have a really interesting couple games, right? Covenant Christian will be a team. Might not be a record as far as that will be a little scary on paper, but they obviously have some players. White Cloud, they're starting off against Hart. That should be a really competitive game.
Yeah.
I'll be curious how that goes. Central Malcolm will be playing Morley right into the conference slate. Lakeview, as you mentioned, Jack, playing Carson City Crystal. And then obviously Morley will be taking on Fremont, the former conference foe, and the Packers. Out of those games, Jack, which one's really catching your eye for these teams?
I really Lakeview and White Cloud could be an interesting matchup. I think that conference side of the CSA White is wide open for second place. Central Montcalm, I said last week, I think they're going to run away with it and they're going to pitch very well. But that Lakeview White Cloud team, you're playing, like you mentioned, conference games are going to be early this year. It's interesting to see what happens. And with the conference games, how is pitching going to go? That's something that I will genuinely be curious about all season long.
Absolutely. And even looking at the Eagles, too, right? They've got a really good stud on the arm. I know that you were really looking at Jack as far as Zach Zeigel goes. I mean, he had a really good start to start the year, including a lot of those strikeouts being the outs. So we'll see how that goes for the Eagles and a lot of those teams. But it's going to be very interesting to say the least with a lot of these games being canceled earlier on what these teams, what these coaching staffs, and what these athletic directors elect to do, trying to get these games back on the schedule, be able to try to fit them in where they can. And that's going to make an interesting last couple of weeks of the season, usually when teams have space left over and available for this exact scenario. And so a lot of these early games for some teams might be they want to start off with tough teams out of the gate. Now those get moved to the end of the year. So now your season gets a little easier and then gets to harder. A lot of strategy in play for these coaches.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be tough. Like you mentioned, playing those harder teams earlier on, kind of easing, maybe getting a couple teams before you get into conference play. And now, majority of the conference across baseball and softball are going to be playing conference games first. I said it earlier, very interesting. The Monday, Wednesday, 3 games in a week, and then you have an out-of-conference opponent on Friday or Saturday. It's going to be an interesting thing to watch on how important these conference games are at the beginning of the year.
100%. And the pitching staffs, right, how are they going to be managed will be a key factor. Let's flip on over to softball. We'll start in the red division. Reed City will be playing against Fremont, as well as they'll be going to Newaygo. Big Rapids starts off the season. Actually, today they're playing Mount Pleasant as we're recording this right now. They'll have Cadillac as well to start the year. Tri-County is waiting for Grant coming up next week, as well as you see Newaygo. They've already played that game against Wyoming. So we'll see how they obviously will react to that. And then they got Reed City right out of the gate as well. Chip Hills against Harrison. That'll be obviously a competitive game. And so we'll see how those teams go. And especially, I think the number one thing people will probably be watching, especially with these games coming up, Reed City at Newaygo, as you mentioned, Jack. I mean, that is a top-tier matchup to start the year. 2 out of the top 3 teams. Probably if we had a preseason poll from these coaches, I would say that those 2 teams are in the top 3 for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. And last year, Reed City having a great season. I think they're going to even build on that even more. We mentioned last week, Big Rapids losing some key seniors. That'll be interesting. Chip Hills, obviously not as great on the record aspect from last season, but I think that Big Rapids Chip Hills game may end up being closer than a lot of people think. The games they play next week.
100%. Looking over at the white division, Kent City will be obviously looking to build off of a strong start with that huge 15-0 win. They're going to have a little bit of wait time. They're going to be waiting for North Muskegon, actually, I believe, over a week from now as we're recording this. So they're going to have a little lull period. We'll see if they continue to practice, and I'm sure they're going to be working on things. Central Montcalm will be taking on Morley Stanwood as well as White Cloud next week. Morley Stanwood going to be playing on Central Montcalm in Lakeview, as you just kind of put together there. And then as well, White Cloud will be playing Hart, Lakeview, and Central Montcalm over the next 3 games. And I think for Lakeview, I think one thing that you highlighted, Jack, so eloquently when we were looking over these game notes is for Lakeview, pitching has to be better. And it's not necessarily that they were hit. That's something that obviously a good hitting team can obviously make contact on pitchers, but they gave up a lot of base on balls in those early 2 games.
Yeah, 10 walks is something you can't happen. I mean, they lost combined between the two games against Vesterberg they played. The run differential was 24-1, outscored by 23 runs in the first one. It was 12 earned runs on 14 runs. They, like you mentioned, didn't allow a whole lot of hits, 10 with it, but allowing the same amount of hits and walks, obviously you can't have that going into. You have Carson City and White Cloud. Hopefully they can bounce back on those two games.
Absolutely. Some big games coming up on deck. And as we wrap up here on episode 2, Jack, I'm going to swing it over to you again. If there's some fans out there that are saying, you know what, I'm going to travel within 60 miles, I'm going to watch one game on each side for baseball and softball, what's that go to and why?
So I'm gonna go softball side. I'm definitely gonna say the Reed City Newaygo game next Monday or Wednesday. That's gonna be a big game. May even end up with conference championship implications later on. Who could be the champion? And that's your first conference game of the year. Who knows how big that game is gonna be? Who knows? Maybe I'm just overreacting on it, and it's not gonna matter that much. But that's a game I think if you had to softball wise, that's when you're gonna want to go out get out to. I'm going to be a little biased on the baseball side. Big Rapids versus Traverse City Central. Traverse City Central is an intriguing team, 5-23, but they play one of the more tougher schedules in the state. Like you mentioned, not the prettiest team on paper, but I think that's definitely one that's going to be an exciting one.
Absolutely. On my part of it, I'm going to pick Grant against Ludington. Both these teams were around 500 last year. Maybe it's the color complex of both of those teams getting biased. Who's going to be able to keep the orange after the doubleheader? We'll see. But that's going to be a good test for both those teams to start the year. So that'll be mine there. I'm looking at softball. I think we have maybe potentially a sneaky game here, especially for Chip Hills going up against Greenville. I think that'll be an interesting one, just based on Greenville, what we've heard from them, what we've seen from Chip Hills trying to improve this year. Might be an early game to keep a little bit of an eye on. It could end up lopsided both ways, but right now it looks a little bit more 50-50 based on what we've heard on paper. And so it'll be interesting to see how that game goes. But be sure, folks, to subscribe so you don't miss out on any episodes coming up here of The Rundown. We're going to have coaches, we're going to have players on the show to talk about their seasons and highlight those teams, especially, and we'll be able to talk to them, once games are under their belt. So we'll start with those next week and we'll get you all the good stuff. But really, especially with this episode, Jack, I think the people they're just ready for baseball and softball. They're ready to get their lawn chairs out. They're ready to go watch these games and not lose toes in the process from frostbite.
Can't wait for some burgers on the grill.
You got it. And hot dogs. Ballparks, of course. Can't beat
Yep.
that. Or are you a burger guy over a hot dog guy?
Definitely a hot dog at the ballpark.
Okay, that's fair. I thought we were going to have to fight for a second, but good pick. Be sure to subscribe, everybody, and be sure to check out these episodes of The Rundown here on Big Rapids Daily News.